sehr gut. Okay. So, also Alberto, first I'm going to say in English that it's an honor and a pleasure to have you as a referent tonight. And now I'm going to tell them in German what you already know about yourself. So you don't have to. Okay. Also Dr. Alberto Martinez Vanon ist ein Spezialist in Spanisch. Also er hat unterrichtet in der Universität in Madrid, also hier an der TU, also in Cervantes Institute, University of Guelph in Canada, UPM in Madrid. Also Alberto, where haven't you taught Spanish? Also all over the place. Also und es ist wirklich eine Ehre und eine Freude, ihn heute Abend als Referent zu haben, zwar in Englisch. Als kleine Einleitung muss ich zurück auf Jiddisch kommen, also unser Thema von letzter Woche, über den ich nicht genug sagen kann. I just want to introduce Ladino by saying a few words about Yiddish, what we talked about last week. Unsere Reihe, wie Sie alle wissen, ist in heilige Sprachen. Und jetzt sind wir bei sekundäre heilige Sprachen sozusagen. Und gehören dazu die jüdische Welt, also Jiddisch wie auch Ladino. Es gab Versuche über die Jahrhunderte, das religiöse Element heraus aus Jiddisch zu nehmen und eine säkuläre Sprache davon zu machen. Aber ein Jiddisch ohne jüdische religiöse Inhalt ist wie ein Wiesen ohne Bier. Und das Gleiche kann man sagen über Ladino. Also, dass es nicht nur eine Vernacular, eine Umgangssprache ist, aber also verbunden mit das Judentum so sehr, dass wir es als sekundäre heilige Sprache bezeichnen können. So I just told them, Alberto, that to try to take the religious element out of Yiddish or Ladino would be like going to the Oktoberfest and not getting any beer to drink. And that's why they're part of what we call the secondary holy languages in Judaism. And now I turn over the floor to you to enlighten us all about Ladino. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for the interest. I'm going to share my screen and we are going to start soon. Okay, so I want to talk about Ladino tonight, but maybe after the half an hour talk, it will be clear why I put this title and also the introduction, because there is so much debate about what name should be called the language and what is specific referring to and how many varieties are. So, but let's say like the culture of Ladino covers all the Judeo-Spanish in general. So this is kind of like a name that is an umbrella nowadays for all these specific varieties. And I want to say that my background is Hispanic linguistic, but I am not an expert in Ladino, so I feel comfortable like presenting an introduction, but I will try to also present the experts and some links and further works, and then if somebody's interested and can get more information with this. There is a lot of people nowadays researching about Ladino. I don't think it's a boom, but it's a trend, let's say. So I hope like this can be like an introduction, and to explain all these things, we need to do a little bit of historical journey, but it's mostly linguistic, let's say, no, because the topic is the Judeo-Spanish and Ladino. So I'm going to start by talking about the origins. So of course, Ladino is a language that the origin is the Spanish, well, the Old Castilian or Old Spanish, which is like a little different from modern Spanish. And I put this map first, just to this, we go back all the way to the 10th century. And then it's interesting because the dynamic in the Iberian Peninsula. That's what I put before. The Ladino is comes from the people that were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, because at that time, what is the countries now from Spain and Portugal, it was a little different back then, no? So the dynamic is we are in a place that first during the 10th, 11th century, it was in the Iberian Peninsula, the Califato de Cordoba, which is very well known. And it was like a place of highly cultural, poetry, literature, all very well known, like authors in Arabic and in Romance Spanish, which is the antecessor of Spanish, or Romance Castilian, and Hebrew. And these three languages together, they interact in the Iberian Peninsula, as well as, for example, Maimonides writes in Arabic, but also in Hebrew. And there are also like some Jewish authors at that time that they write introductions, like mostly the religious books are in Hebrew, and that is a trend that we'll see that goes almost until the 18th century. But for example, in the introduction, which is mostly to present the work, sometimes we found the three languages together. So this kind of like convivencia that some people referring in languages, we even have in the same introduction to the books, we have Hebrew, Arabic, and this Romance. And okay, I wanted to start with this. The Romance languages that we have in the peninsula is so the Califato, it used to go all the way up to the north, let's say even more than here, because in the 700, it was only the Basque Country and a little bit of Asturias, but then it goes by the year 100, it goes a little more, and they, in this area, like it was covering all of Spain, they continue speaking Latin during those days. It was like kind of like a variety that it gets more and more different than Latin, and that would be the origin of all these Romance languages. This is nothing different than what happened in France or in Italy. It's kind of like the loss of the contact to the other places and the interaction with Arabic, mainly in Spain. So it goes like this, all these languages, this is also territories and in some case kingdoms, but it also refers to languages which is Galician, means Galician Portuguese, which is like the antecessor of today's Galician and Portuguese languages. Leones, or Leones, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, is almost disappeared. It's all today's only spoken in some specific mountains or something like that. But of course, like we'll see, like the Castilian is the Proto-Spanish, and then Basque and Catalan is also like today's languages are very, very well-known languages. No? So first I wanna put, let me see if I can change the screen. This is a linguistic map that it goes to, this is going there. So about the 14th century, we can see that Castilians almost cover, and this is already 16th, 17th century, but let's say by the time of the expulsion is more or less now, no? And then they get Granada, the Castilian kingdom, and then is when the Jews and the Muslim, they were expelled, no? So this is very easy to see, because here, like Granada gets 200 years, it was like by itself the only Muslim kingdom, and then in the 1942 1492, they conquer Granada, and there's also like a few months later is when the expulsion it is. So going back to the map, one of the things that is important to, if we are talking about the Judeo-Spanish or the Ladino, is like it's a Romance language, and it's very similar, or it gets it based from Old Spanish. So Old Spanish can be understood as a medieval Castilian or medieval Spanish. And in our case, it's like there are two, well, sorry, in our case, in the Spanish language case, there are two important points. It's one is the 13th century, which is the time of Toledo, Escuela de Traductores. And if we go back to this map, Toledo here was part of the Califato, no? And it's not casual that Madrid seems to be in the line, because Madrid was founded as a, from the Muslim point of view, as a defense. Okay, so it was almost in the line, but the important city was Toledo here, right? And of course, Cordoba and Sevilla and other cities. But Toledo goes into the Castilian hands, I think in the 11th century. There already this, let's say, like cohabitation of three cultures, it wasn't as idyllic as it was, or I thought it was at some point in the past, because the Califato became like different kingdoms, different Muslim kingdoms, and it was like when they were fighting against the Christian kingdom, it was a trend of a more extremist people. So the minorities, which in this case was Jewish or Christian, they were, that's why it's one of the reasons that also, for example, some people like Maimonides, they went to Fez and later to other places, no? Because it was like a more extremist tent. So when Toledo went into Christian hands in the 11th century, maybe other people, they already left, but for some reason, a lot of these kingdoms that they passed from Muslim to Christian, for 200 years, they kind of continue what is will now call in Spanish convivencia. So from the 13th century, especially like 12, for example, Toledo was Castilla from the 11th. So 11th, 12th century, 13th century, they were kind of reproducing what it was when the activity of the Califato de Córdoba. And one of the best examples is Escuela de Traductores. So this is like, for a linguistic point of view, very important for two reasons. One is, well, this is like a very important project, but it set up the characteristic of medieval Spanish, which it will be very similar or kind of similar, but in the 16th century, it will change again a little bit. But when we read text in Spanish from the 13th, 14th century, it can be understood. And also, for example, this school of translation, in the past, even from, let's say, in the Christian kingdom, when they were translating, they wanted to translate all the scientific, astronomy, medicine, poetry from the Califato de Córdoba, and it used to be translated to Latin. But with this project, they start to translate it in Spanish, well, in Romance. It was called Castilian Romance, but that will be Spanish now, or very similar than we'd call it medieval Spanish. And then it's a language that now will be, it will be written languages, not only like a dialect that some people speak in the Iberian Peninsula, but the most of the written books are in Latin. No, with the Escuela Traductores, we get the medieval Spanish, and also for the Jewish point of view, they were a lot of the translators, they were Jewish because they were people that they knew the three languages. So they were like very useful in this project, like they knew Hebrew, of course, and Arabic and Judeo-Arabic, that they were languages of the Iberian Peninsula during the Caliphate, and they knew the Romance, which the Romance language, the Proto-Castilian, it was also speak during the Caliphate de Cordoba. And now that a lot of translations from three religions, they get together, people from three religions, but it was an important Jewish component, let's say. So some people, well, this is like a modern day photo, but it's just to talk about Toledo. So sorry, I didn't have like a more historical accurate photo, but the Juderia de Toledo is very well known. That is one of the most preserved ones nowadays. And it's in this moment that the Judeo-Spanish or the Ladino starting to appear, because it was mostly normal Spanish at that time, so medieval Spanish, but these people that they start to need this Spanish for specific things. For example, one is they need to add some Hebrew words for talking about like costumes or talking about holidays or liturgy, things like that. And there is a second thing, which is sometimes some parts, for example, the Pesach, the Passover text, the Jewish Pasch text, they used to translate in Spanish for everybody to understand the text. And this is done also in medieval Spanish, but interestingly enough, we are going to talk about this later, is two different things almost from the beginning. One is the most, let's say, like there are few written books like that, like maybe for a translation of a religious text, and this is translated word by word from Hebrew. So the kind of the syntax is different, and also the language is a little more like with more Hebrew and more archaic. And the other is a spoken medieval Spanish with some Hebrew and maybe also Arabic or Judeo-Arabic terms. And these two things will be continue later, we will see, and that will be one of the themes of sometimes we call one of them Ladino, or we call both of them Ladino. That's depending of the, well, not we, let's say the experts will have this debate until nowadays. And so, okay, so we talk about this, and then I put I understand like this is in English, but I have these 2 or 3 quotes in Spanish because it was like the perfect definition. So it's interesting that this language, it has so, well, from a linguistic point of view, we need to talk about so many things, but this is like, okay, it's Castilian or medieval in Spanish in the base, but with a lot of, from the beginning, a lot of influence from Hebrew, which was always, or at least at this moment before, and most of the time, the most prestigious language, and the language like most of the books and the written books of these people, they will be bilingual people, especially the most cultural elements of the community, or the ones that they were like with more studies, let's say, I don't know. So they will be bilingual, so they will be a lot of influence from Hebrew. But then this is until this moment. But then after the expulsion, they started to be in contact with other languages, and that we will see later. So because now it's not even Ladino or Judeo-Spanish yet, now it's just medieval Spanish with some Jewish touch, let's say. And then one of the important things, which is like the first characteristic, like made this language, specifically Ladino, is that, as we saw before, in the Iberian Peninsula, it wasn't only Castilian. Castilian was maybe 80% of the peninsula, even in the 15th century, when they call it in Spanish the cuña. It means like the Castilian geographical area, it gets bigger. And then the other languages, it goes like, okay, Galician in the east and Catalan in the west, but the area of the other languages reduced itself. But this in Spain or in the Iberian Peninsula, this process continued, and Castilla will be like until nowadays, which is like with the exception of Portugal, is the main language in Spain, although it's, of course, it's true, like in Catalonia, they speak Catalan, in Valencia, Mallorca, they also speak dialect of that language, and in Basque Country, some people, they know Basque languages, but nowadays, the trend continue that the Spanish language is the main one, but at that time, at the 15th century, it wasn't that clear. So Castilian was the most important, but Catalan, Leonese, Portuguese is also impacted. And what happened is not that because they were a group that together went to some places, they kind of mixed the language. And the Castilian is the element which is the most important in Ladino by far, but Ladino has more components of Catalan and Portuguese together than normal Spanish will have. Normal Spanish, if we this is what I was going to say, in the 16th century, there is another change in Spanish, like there is like El Siglo de Oro, which is like the golden age of the Spanish literature with Cervantes, another writer, and then it further differentiates themselves to the Portuguese and Leonese. But Ladino comes from before, when they were more interrelated. So this is the first thing. They call it, in linguistic term, kind of a koiné. It's a mix of dialect, but it's true, it's not that different than the medieval Castilian, because Castilian was the more numerous, most of the people came from that area, and it was like the language was it was the base, and also the, let's say, the costumes in some cases, no? So as we say before, this is like talking about the spoken language, but there is like from the, well, not from the beginning, but let's say early 16th century, there are like some kind of translation from Hebrew word by word, and there are things that we already read them we still read them nowadays, and the people that they know Hebrew, they can realize like these translations, like for example from this Jewish holiday called Pesach, it translates word by word by than Hebrew, and then for example Alayla Se, which is like this night, in this text, which is Ladino, let's say like written Ladino, written formal Ladino, is translated by La Noche La Esta, because we want to keep the syntactic structure from Hebrew, as opposed to this night, which like in Spanish will be esta noche. No? That will be a different thing. And so there is kind of like two versions, and of course they are related, but at this moment they are kind of separate, because this is like a very formal one for a specific purpose, because we are going to see like at least 16th century and 17th century, they were no a lot of books of Judeo-Spanish, because of course, like a lot of people, it was their language to speak Spanish in the day-by-day activities, but for written thing and for important text, they will value the Hebrew, and some people, they will argue that they wanted to keep it that way, if possible, because that would be also seen as the ideal to continue with that. And another thing, the last thing, let's say, for this introduction is, so depending of which countries these people that they were expelled where to live, they were in contact with different languages, and then they have different dialects. So this is a map that I found of speakers of Ladino, and we can see, I will try to put it like bigger. This is not exactly how it is like nowadays. There is like people speak, or the experts speak mostly about two dialects. One is like the Western Ladino, or Western Judeo-Spanish, and Eastern Judeo-Spanish and Western Judeo-Spanish. So Western will be the Moroccan Judeo-Spanish, and this will be the area of, we can see here, Istanbul, Salonika, Sarajevo, Smyrna, Jerusalem, Safed, etc. No? And so this will be kind of like the things that we are going to talk now. And as I say, I will try to put here that the links of the people who research on that, because this is kind of only like a basic thing. And one of the things is like in the 16th and 17th century, it was like the expulsion was very recent, and the people they have like similar values and costume and styles, because a lot of them they move together to places. No, for example, Salonika quickly, well, not quickly, but during the 16th century ended up, or 17th century ended up having 50% of Jewish population. Like this is a process, but that they also got immigration from nearby towns. But by the end of the 17th century or 18th century, the Jewish Ladino speaker Jewish presence was huge. Because, for example, in Istanbul, it was also very big, and it still is very important, but it was, because it was like a very big city, it was like kind of 10%, let's say. And also in Istanbul, it was another Jewish community with other languages or other costumes, like the Romaniots, and also they were Ashkenazi there. But Salonika is kind of like one of the ones that they have some Jewish population there, but the immigration were there, and to the places that we saw here, no, around the Ottoman Empire, because they could go there, and also to Morocco. We will see, like, this is kind of like a linguistic map, not historical map, let's say, because, for example, a lot of people that they were expelled from Spain, they went also to South Morocco, and they were also to Syria, let's say. But here is the places that they continue speaking Spanish, because that depends of when they arrived to one place, what was like the presence of other Jewish community. For example, it's in South Morocco, they are places that are well known, like in Fez and Rabat and other cities, Mequinez, sorry, that they had a very important presence of people that they were expelled from Spain, but because they were not majority, they kind of mix, and they were also people that they know Arabic, or some of them Arabic and Judeo-Arabic. So they ended up doing kind of a mix, maybe in the costume and style of life, and the Hispanic presence was very influential, let's say. Even by this day, a lot of Moroccan Jewish people, when they get married, they put in the ketubah, we get married by the costumes of the people that they were expelled from Castilla. So that influenced a lot of people there, but in the south, that they were not majority, they didn't keep the language. They started to speak Arabic or Judeo-Arabic, and the same Syria, because they were like important communities there, and they kind of like, but for example, in the cities that we are going to talk here, like around Tetuan and Tanger, they were like a majority of people there is very close to where they came from Spain. So most of the community spoke Judeo-Spanish, and the same happened here, like in Istanbul versus let's say, other places like other cities in Egypt or in Syria, that they ended up mixing with other people and speaking Judeo-Arabic or Arabic on top of Hebrew. The Hebrew present is always there. Like, we need to keep in mind that when we talk about this language, this is a language that they spoke, but they spoke always this language in being bilingual with Hebrew, most of the people. So this is what I put here, that during the 16th and 17th century at least, they have this kind of like two languages for two different themes, one mostly from the written theme, and the other one for speaking, and with this component of the Ladino that was kind of for translation that we talk. Okay, and then okay, I want to say like it continued like this more or less in the especially like Salonika, Istanbul, and Sfat. They become important cultural cities also for the Jewish perspective, but also in general. And they were like main cities for during the Ottoman Empire. And it's in the 18th century that there is a change in Ladino, and it's kind of a process, it's not like a point, but this is kind of the moment that people will think Ladino is different than medieval Spanish. Let's say when after 200 years, these people, we are now going to talk about Eastern Ladino, people that they were in the Ottoman Empire. So they were not in contact with the Spanish, how the Spanish changed in the 17th century a lot. And the language was kind of different. Now because they continue speaking medieval Spanish, but also during these 200 years, they add elements from the Turkish culture they add terms from the Turkish, Greek language, and if we talk about Belgrado, so maybe Slavic terms. And at the same time, it was a decision, let's say, because we are talking about now literature, no? So it was a decision from the rabbis, from the more cultural people of the communities, that they needed to write something in the Judeo-Spanish for everybody to understand. They wanted to reinforce the religious tradition because now it passed 200 years and they were in the exile, and they wanted to do that. And these two, well, especially Mean Loes, which is like a famous book, is not like, well, it's a book that you hear people still read about it during the 20th century, and not only in the Ottoman Empire, but also in Tetuan, also in the Western Ladino communities. And it's kind of a commentary of the weekly portion of the Bible that we read, but this rabbi, which is Rabbi Yaakov Puli, they wrote it in Ladino for the people to understand. And also there is another important rabbi, Abraham ben Yishak Asa. He also did translation of the biblical text. And the expert in Ladino, they consider these two persons the fathers of the Ladino literature, because they not only wrote the books that they were not Hebrew translation word by word, they wrote something in Ladino, and they kind of set up the standard for the written Ladino in the 18th century. Because before that, the written text, they were only word by word, keeping the syntaxis of the Hebrew. It was like kind of Hebrew in Spanish. And now, because they want people to understand, they write things in Ladino. Of course, it's kind of different than the colloquial Ladino or Judeo-Spanish that they will speak. For example, at this point in the 18th century, it will be different, the dialect from Belgrado or Salonika or Sarajevo, but this was kind of like the more elevated version for the written Spanish, and they set up this kind of the graphia and the how to write it and the kind of like the styles. And there is another quote that also in this century, it came like 3 or 4 things together that it was very important for kind of a start to have a literature in Ladino, which is like a lot of people, they wanted to renew the traditional religious values, and they wanted the people to understand in their language. Some of the people, we are going to see that later, some of the people still speak Hebrew, but others no, and they want to translate it for them. And there is also a new editorial houses. It's also the House Sonfino. It was first in Italy, and after it was in England. And then, so there is a lot of there is important commercial routes that made like a economical boom. So they have the means. So it's 3 or 4 things together. That, but I want to say, like, even this is like the first books or the first books in Ladino, which is not this language which is translated from Hebrew word by word. Still at this time, 2/3 of the books of the community are written in Hebrew. 2/3 at this time. No, when the people say the 18th century is the classical age of Ladino in writing or Ladino literature, at this time there are a lot of people of the communities are still bilingual with Hebrew. And then also because of this standard, instead of having 5 or 6 dialects, now it gets less, like for several reasons. First, like the community in Sfat, or let's say the communities in Israel, they mostly speak Hebrew. They say that there are a few families that continue speaking Ladino internally for day-by-day things, but they speak in Hebrew. On other places, they speak also in Judeo-Arabic. And also in some places like Belgrado or something like that, their difference of dialects, these kind of words and pronunciation that they were influenced by Slavic language, they get the difference, they get less because of this written literature. And now by the 18th century, there is like 2 main dialects in this Eastern Ladino, which is Salonika and Istanbul. It's like the 2 main cities of Ladino at this time. Of course, they are also important in Israel, but in there, the Hebrew presence was even more. And also, there is not only these books that we comment, but also there is like book about history, about medicine, about the communities. For example, we are going to see later 1 or 2 examples, the community, how they run itself. With the most obvious version is also Istanbul, but Salonika until the Second World War, it's like half of the city or most of the city, it was run in Judeo-Spanish, no? Because it was kind of they have some independence of how to run itself during the Ottoman Empire. No, like one of the things that these communities, they continue together with some linguistical uses is because during the Ottoman Empire they have this kind of autonomy of the communities, and of course there were some issues about like paying taxes and relationship with the people that were in charge of the empire, but at the same time, they have some autonomy on how they run things internally. And these are like during the 18th century, this is a map of the Ottoman Empire. And it's interesting that they were connected. Well, this like not all of these Jewish communities speak Ladino, of course, like we were talking, like it was like mostly important communities like Sarajevo, Belgrado, of course, Salonika, Smyrna, Istanbul, and also some of these are kind of like a way that some of the people they used to, not only because of the expulsion, but before Some people, they wanted like to immigrate to Israel for religious reason, and it's kind of like a way of going there. And afterwards, also it was like a commercial route, and it was important because at this time, these communities, like for example, there was like it was very important, as I understood, in Salonika, the clothes business and these related things, and they were having like contacts between the communities, and that's why they got influences with this dialect, like Sarajevo. They were in contact with Salonika and Istanbul, and they were like addressing this business in Judeo-Spanish as well. And so we were talking about the written forms, and also what we say the dialect we speak. We have also the difference that we talk, and in Belgrado it was another history, because as you can see here, by the 20th century, this area which is in a soft green is no longer Ottoman Empire. So it goes, and we are going to talk about that, because that will be a huge change from Salonika, which is like one of the two more important communities, and for the Ladino speakers, and for the people in general there, no? And so the Salonika and Istanbul, Salonika at this time, 18th century, was part of the Ottoman Empire, so it was like the same. And also in the city, the main language was Judeo-Spanish, but there was other languages that they were in contact. It's not like now we imagine Greece, but they were like some Greek element in the language, some Greek element, sorry, some Turkish element, but not that different than Istanbul, although it's a little different dialect. And then during the 17th century, when they spoke Ladino in Israel, although the Hebrew component was always for this speaker more prestigious, more important, I ended up speaking in Hebrew. The Judeo-Spanish of that place, it was more influenced by the Judeo-Arabic and Arabic, that they also in contact with their language. And also we are going to talk about later to the other Judeo-Spanish, that is the Western Judeo-Spanish. This is called Jaquetia, the Moroccan one. Some of the things that we talk now, how they started to mix the things from the Iberian Peninsula language together, and then they have the influence or bilingualism with Hebrew, and then they add other languages, is similar to the Judeo-Spanish of Jaquetia, but the language will be there Arabic and Judeo-Arabic. It wouldn't be Turkish in Moroccan, so it's a little different. So some people say that these kind of like new terms from the countries that they add up to 20 or 30% of the languages. So it's not clear that these two dialects will be mutually understood, but they were kind of in contact, especially like from the Moroccan community, because as we saw in the map, if we go back to this map that we have here, they were, okay, the thing here we will see later is like they were in contact with the Spanish Peninsula a little more, because in the Ottoman Empire, they didn't have the influence of the Spanish at all. But from a Jewish point of view, these were communities that they were speaking in, let's say, Judeo-Spanish. So, but they didn't have the let's say the Ladino as the written things. They sometimes get it from editorials from here, and also they were visited. They were like in these communities, they were like big ones and very prestigious, like Salonika and Istanbul, and some of the rabbis and intellectuals, they visit this area, so they kind of were in contact with the other forms of Judeo-Spanish. But for the people of this part of Morocco, they will call Ladino this Eastern Euro-Spanish. They will think what they speak, they will say is Jaquetia, which is like Western Euro-Spanish, but they will refer to Ladino to this. So that's why now it's not a confusion, but now there is kind of like the expert kind of disagree about what is the ideal term, because what is Ladino? Like for the speakers of Istanbul, Ladino was the written form that they were translated word by Hebrew, and they will speak Judeo. This is what they say, or some of them at least, they will say they will call the language Judeo. And for the people of North Morocco, they will call Ladino also the books, and they will call their language Jaquetia. But because like the speakers of North Morocco are not very big in numbers, we are going to see later that most of the speakers Ladino nowadays come from Turkey. So that's why now we call it Ladino, because a lot of Turkish speakers of Ladino, they went to Israel, and they were kind of the only dialect so far. We will see that for historical reason. And then we call it Ladino culture. So I think both terms are good. Like we can say Ladino culture because it's the culture of the people that, and the language, one of the language with Hebrew that the people that they were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, but also nowadays, especially from the Spanish point of view, we call it Jewish Spanish to kind of cover all the dialects, all the varieties. So I hope I am not going too fast, and then I am going to continue. So the 19th and 20th century, let's say we were talking about the moment that the Ladino has more influence, but in the 19th century, at least in the Ottoman Empire, this is what the experts are saying, it started to change the thing. One is the influence of the French and Occidental languages, which were very common. Now we are changing little by little from Ottoman Empire to the different nations. And first, there is like these schools that some of the Jewish students used to study when they were children, is the Alliance Israelite Universelle, and they will learn French in there. So now the Ladino will be very influenced by French, at least in the Istanbul a little more. And also because, for example, now if we are talking about Salonika, at some point the Salonika changed to Thessaloniki, and that, which is a political thing, is not for this talk, but from a linguistic point of view, is also affected because there were some requirements. Now they were not part of an empire. They couldn't like organize themselves as much as before, and then they were required to some things that they would do in their language. Now they were in Greek, and then also from different things. But still, let's say the people, because Salonika, it was like they at some point they wanted to. Some people they were arguing to try to be an independent state, only the city, because it was so clearly different than all the other parts of Greece, because you have a city and the cities surrounded one were completely different. In Salonika, they would speak, most of the people, they will speak Ladino, and it says that if you wanted a job in Salonika at that time, let's say like 19th century, early 20th century, you needed to learn Ladino, most likely to apply for the job. So, but it didn't happen. And I wanted to share another link. One of the, now there is in the University of Washington, there is a big department of Ladino studies, and they found one of the professors went to Salonika, and in one of the all community centers, something like that, it found a lot of written example of the Salonika Jewish community in the early 20th century, and it's very interesting. And well, the historians know that it's not something that it wasn't known. A lot of people knew before that this city was run in Ladino, and it was a city that most of the residents were Jewish, and it was special, and they have many visitors from other Jewish European communities. And it's also like here they spoke Ladino, but one of the things that they found is that this professor found that they were like sending help from the Jewish people in Poland. So they were like kind of connected with the other European communities. And I wanted to show you these newspapers that I saw you before. One moment, because it shows like in that city, because like the majority were Jewish residents, you have all kind of ideologies, and it was like, if I am not mistaken, 20 or 30 different newspapers in Ladino, and they have newspapers that they were like socialist, Zionist, apparently one even hard right, although I don't know to what extent, very religious one, all the kinds. And they were all running at the writing thing is interesting because Ladino is a Romance language, but until the 20th century, it was written a lot of time in Hebrew, in the Hebrew character, sorry. So they will use one of the Hebrew graphics character, which is Rashi, and they will use, and also one that is a cursive of like for writing with the hand, that is different than the modern Hebrew use. It's called solitreo. So they will use these two, but of course, like if you read it, it was Ladino in there. No, and this is like very interesting founder, and also it's a way of presenting like this one of the departments that now focusing in the research of Ladino and these Sephardic cultures or Sephardic studies or something similar than that. Okay, so if we go back to what we were saying, on top of everything, like the influence of the French or other languages like Greek, and the immigration, because the things started to get difficult in Europe. They immigrate a lot of people from these places to Israel and also to United States, and these are communities that there is no by coincidence that there is a big department in Sephardic study in Seattle, because it's like the house of a huge community of Ladino speakers, or at least originally Ladino speakers, but now I don't know if everybody will speak or only the old people. But also is, as some of you will know, the Greek was occupied by the Nazis, and 50,000 of Salonika Jews, they were murdered. And that also one of the reasons that the Ladino, one of the big communities of Ladino, they Finnish speak that language because they were like murdered in the Holocaust. And then so nowadays a characteristic of the Ladino is more the Turkish part, because it's the one that it was left, as opposed to Salonika and the Balkans, that they were very much affected to a incredible, also horrible degree in those communities. And now, well, from this point of view, from Western, for Eastern Ladino, then there is still use in Israel, in United States, and in the Turkish people that still live in Turkey, the Turkish Jewish community, some of them. And then I wanted to talk a little bit of Haketia, because if it's interesting that Ladino is and the Jewish studies in general of Salonika and this part is now having a trend. The Jewish Spanish of Morocco, it was kind of like the small part. So, but now because of the Ladino trend, it's also getting some attention, and it's interesting because as we see, although it was like a small community, it also like have an influence, no? And it was mostly, as we saw, as we talked before, they were like people that they were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, that they went to Fez and Rabat and Mekines. This is very, the community of Fez is very famous, but they were mixed with the community that they were in these important cities, and they ended up speaking mostly Hebrew and Judeo-Arabic or Arabic, while in Tangier and especially Tetuan, it was interesting, maybe because it's so close to Spain, it's so close to, well, it's the part close to Gibraltar, that they kept the Judeo-Spanish. And in fact, it was not only in Tangier and Tetuan, but, okay, I'm going to try to conclude in 5 minutes. It was not only in Tangier and Tetuan, but also because of the people that they went to other cities, also in Argelia, in Oran, and a lot of people from Tetuan, they went to live in Gibraltar. And that's why until today, some people speak Haketia in there. And also the language that they use in Gibraltar nowadays, which is called Llanito, is kind of a mix of Spanish and English. They have some influence of Haketia, not only for Jewish speakers, but for all of them. So I want to say like this thing, it mirrors what we talk about the Ottoman empires a little bit, but the thing is like they have all these languages together, like Hebrew, Ladino as a written form, Haketia, which is the colloquial form with Arabic terms. That's what is Haketia. Like people who speak Arabic, they say Haka means to talk, to chat. So for them it was, of course, because it was the language that they could chat for the day-by-day things, but then they will speak also in Arabic with the general population and Hebrew for important things. And they were different times. One is, sorry, okay, I will finish in 1 minute. They were different times, but the Spanish got in contact with this region. Interestingly enough, the region that they were preserving the Haketia, it was also the region that the Spanish colonized in the 20th century. So what happened with the Haketia is it goes in contact back to Spanish as opposed to the other language. So most of the people that they spoke Haketia, they ended up speaking and back again. So when the Spanish, they went to Tetuan, they were surprised that they were people speaking Spanish there. Kind of an old Spanish, but they were surprised they were speaking Spanish there, but because they were back to Spain and also they immigrate, a lot of them to Madrid and Barcelona and Andalusia, they ended up speaking Spanish, but nowadays it's most like Spanish with some Haketia sentence and wishes and a text, religious text, songs, or something like that. But maybe the old people still have the Haketia tongue, which is like very influenced. It's similar to Ladino, but and I put here that nowadays we can do, if someone is interested, there is a radio of the Jewish community in Spain that somebody can listen to Haketia here. I will finish in a second. 1 moment. For example, they do like...
Nos aburrimos. Colega nuestra en la escuela de la Alianza y nos hicimos amigos casi desde el primer día que nos vimos. Una gran señora.
And also like in Israel, there are like the Autoridad Nacional de Ladino. There is, you can listen to Ladino, Jaquetía, and all kind of things.
Existe actualmente.
Así que muy satisfecho de estar aquí.
Señor Nabhan, ¿podría?
This is like an old president, one of former president of Israel who was a Ladino speaker.
Trata de la herencia judía de España.
And so these are different links that I suggest if you want to continue learning about Ladino. Go to Autoridad Nacional de Ladino or Radio Sefarad, that is the radio of the Federation of the Spanish Jewish Community. That's everything for today. I hope you find it interesting. Thank you very much.
I think we're also full with new insights, with new information, with new learning. It is hard to formulate questions. Alberto, I would again thank you very, very much. I would like to add one little anecdote about my connection with Ladino. When I first visited the Diaspora Museum in Tel Aviv, the Beit HaTfutzot, I think it was in 98 or 99, there was an old man. Maybe he was younger than I am now, but at that time he was old to me. He was checking people's bags, you know, before they were let into the museum. And he introduced himself as Saptai Gormezano. And he said he was from Turkey and that he was speaking Ladino. So he couldn't speak very good English. I spoke no Hebrew at the time, but we could exchange a few words. He spoke Ladino, I spoke Spanish, and we could understand each other. So thank you once again for a most interesting lecture. I hope it was not the last time that we were in contact. And I urge you now to give Alberto a big hand using the Reaktionen button down there, or clap your hands like this. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. I hope you like it. Thank you.